All right, Psalm 32, let's call this one Pray for Counsel, in the psalm that actually seems to start off more or less talking about confession, where David says, in a relatively famous passage, "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit," seeming to go back to that pattern we said before in this week's set of Psalms, where David starts off with a praise in this psalm, basically saying you're blessed to the degree God forgets all that junk you done that he could have otherwise, as they used to say, put on blast or publicized. And so to the degree he has forgiven, forgotten, or chosen to cover over some things that we have done, that is a blessing worth saying thanks for, thus the praise. But as we have seen in previous Psalms, David does not simply stop with the praise. He goes on to a recall, understanding that when he is saying it's a blessing to have God cover over our sins, it presupposes that we are openly acknowledging them to at least him, because David is going to go on to say he recalls a time when he concealed his sin and God's hand was actually heavy upon him until he, in verse 5, acknowledged his sin. He did not cover his iniquity, and he chose to confess his transgression, at which point God chose to forgive. Understanding that in verse 6, David is going to go on to say, "Therefore, let everyone who is godly," once again, not a blank check, but let everyone who is godly seek to offer a prayer to God, the asking of God in a time when he can be found. And when it says when he can be found, it may be talking about a specific time, but in the context, David is recalling a time when he asked of God in a situation in which he could be found, a situation in which David stopped concealing his sin and acknowledged them in a way that motivated God to forgive him. But as we mentioned before in previous Psalms regarding mercy, the question is, who are you after you get the mercy? And the question is, likewise, here, who are we after we confess and have God forgive? Understanding that the psalm is going to seem to have God actually step in this time. And after David makes his confession and receives his forgiveness, it seems that God steps in to say around about verse 8, "I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you should go. I will counsel you," that's the title, "with my eye upon you. Be not like a horse or mule without understanding, which must be curbed with bit and bridle, or it will not stay near you." And that's very similar to an illustration we used before of an employee who clocks in, but as soon as they can, they look for a place to go hide and maybe even go sleep. It is one thing for that employee to be found out and confess, "Hey, boss, I'm never going to go sleep in that corner again." The operative part of that phrase being in that corner, because if we've got 3 or 4 other hiding places, then our confession might not really matter. And even though we might have retained our freedom to go seek out those other 3, 4, however many hiding places we've got, what we lose is the freedom that comes with the boss's trust. And I have seen situations in workplaces and in life where people who are consistently seeking out hiding places on the job can sometimes, if you listen to them long enough, begin to envy people who have the freedom that comes along with the boss's trust. And so in preserving the freedom to slack, we can often lose the freedom that comes along with the trust of God, just like we can lose the freedom that comes along with the trust of our employer. And so in a culture that prizes its freedoms, one of the most difficult things I find as a preacher to do is acknowledge to people, yes, I am telling you that God is calling you to let go of some of your freedoms. However, if nothing else, it may be worth asking God to counsel us at least enough to see whether or not the freedoms we are clinging to are worth losing the freedom that comes when he trusts us.